In the early 1800s, most of the Southwest United States was covered in grasslands. And then due to a complicated set of factors, including fire suppression, climate change, and overgrazing, woody plants like mesquite and creosote that we see all over the Southwest these days started to encroach in these grasslands. This is a process that we call woody plant encroachment. And so this has resulted in these grasslands changing into shrublands. We're studying this woody plant encroachment in drylands. And in dryland regions, by definition, water is limited. Most of the rainfall that falls in these areas ends up being used by plants. So understanding how plants control the water budget becomes really important.
We began this research with a simple premise. The topography affects the distribution of shore water and runoff during storm events, and that this potentially has an influence on the outcomes of serification, or what we would call woody plant encroachment. Woody plant encroachment hasn't been studied from the point of view of the groundwater hydrological cycle. This is because woody plant encroachment is often assumed to happen just on the surface of soils. And since groundwater levels are very far beneath the surface of soils, there would be a disconnect between the two. What we found, surprisingly, is that there isn't a disconnect. That when woody plant encroachment occurs, it affects runoff production, which also influences the amount of water that becomes available as groundwater recharge, and ultimately affects the sustainability of groundwater aquifers.
Our previous work at the Jornada found that one way that groundwater recharge can occur is when water is focused in channel bottoms. The channels tend to have sandy sediments, which allow water to infiltrate really quickly. And so in this study, we set out to understand how woody plant encroachment, which is occurring all over the world, impacts the amount of water infiltrating through stream beds. And then the second question was trying to understand how vegetation change and climate change work together to impact water budgets at the end of the 21st century. And so we used a computer model to build these scenarios and simulate what would happen. And we found that the conversion of grasslands to shrublands can increase groundwater recharge, but then this comes at the expense of water in the soil for vegetation to use. This happens when the conversion to shrublands results in more bare soil. And we also found that when we consider both woody plant encroachment and climate change, that the woody plant encroachment pathway is the primary mechanism that determines the changes to groundwater recharge in the future. We were pretty surprised by this to find that woody plant encroachment might be more important than climate change in controlling groundwater recharge, because this is a new finding that hasn't been found anywhere else in the world so far. But I just want to be careful and say this doesn't necessarily mean that climate change is not important. In fact, we found that both climate change and woody plant encroachment changed the amount of groundwater recharge. It's just that the woody plant encroachment was stronger. These findings can be really important for land management. So currently in New Mexico, we're spending millions of dollars to try and reverse woody plant encroachment. People are trying to kill shrubs to bring back grass, mostly for grazing animals. So understanding how these management actions could impact our scarce water resources can allow policymakers to make better decisions regarding how to manage the land.
Natural question that arises from this work is whether grassland recovery in dryland systems also influences groundwater recharge. In other words, if we were to reverse the effects of serification and promote grasses to establish in those areas that had traditionally been shrublands, would we have an impact on the hydrological cycle? Well, certainly I think that would be the case. Indeed, if a grassland were to be promoted, more soil water would be maintained within a soil profile. More of that would go back into the atmosphere as evapotranspiration. Less runoff would be produced, and ultimately less water would go into the channel systems, leading to groundwater recharge. So what the grassland system would do is make more of the available precipitation into plant available water. And in fact, a positive cycle of grassland reestablishment could be created through this particular mechanism.